Well, hey, welcome back, history lovers, to the second part of this video lecture on putting together the Constitution, right? I left you here with this last time. You could take a good long gander at it then, now, but now let's actually get into the convention itself, okay? The first big topic of debate was how are we going to put together the legislative branch of government? Our version of parliament, where the laws are going to be made, like tax laws. Everybody from every state is worried about this and wondering about this because, of course, nobody wants to pay a lot of taxes. Everybody knows everybody's got to pay, but everybody's trying to figure out how to somehow make it best for their own state. Okay? Now, Madison had, before the convention even started, Madison had written a proposal for a government. Okay? So it became known as the Virginia Plan of James Madison, or the Big State Plan, because ultimately, when you read through James Madison's plan, you go, okay, this is going to be best for big states. I don't mean big in size geographically, I mean big in population. Okay? Now, go ahead and read that over. Take a minute. You can just pause the video here. Okay? People from smaller states were not too crazy about this idea. And overnight, William Patterson, a delegate from New Jersey, came up with the New Jersey, or the small state plan, okay, which was similar to Madison's plan in some ways and wildly divergent in other ways. The first month of the convention was arguing about how to just get this legislature figured out, okay? How many votes is each state going to have? That was the essence of it, okay? Finally, a couple of delegates from Connecticut suggested that there be a bicameral legislature, like in Madison's plan, an upper house and a lower house, and that the upper house, in the upper house, which is the Senate, right, each state would have two votes, two senators. The lower house, which is our House of Representatives, would be determined by population. So states, big states, would have more in the House, like California. We got the most of all because California rules. And then little states that are not very important at all, like North Dakota. No offense if you're from there, but sorry. Okay, they don't have very many delegates because the state doesn't have very many people in it, right? Ultimately, when they got to this point and were able to agree upon this, this became known as the Great Compromise, finally sort of putting the legislative branch together. It was the one thing that they argued about the longest and hardest, okay? Hello? I just stripped a gear. Wait a minute. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, in the long run, they came up with a government made up of three specific branches. Not, if this was the English model of government, we'd say, well, the legislative branch is two things. It's the House of Representatives and it's the Senate, and that makes four branches. But no, we don't see it that way. Okay? One branch, the legislative branch, Congress. Another branch, the executive, the president. They didn't have the name for the guy yet, but ultimately it was the president, right? Third branch, in no particular order, the judiciary, or the Supreme Court. Okay, now let's quickly rattle through what I consider the most essentially important powers of each branch. Okay, let's start with the powers of the legislature up here on the left. First of all, number one, they make the laws. Okay, if you look at the number one for each one, they make the laws. The executive enforces the laws. The judiciary interprets and determines the constitutionality of laws. The most important power for each branch comes back to laws. Okay? So, legislature, make the laws, check. Number two, control federal revenues. All the money that belongs to the federal government, from taxes on imports, from nowadays income tax, from all different sources, that money is controlled by Congress. Congress determines what is spent and how much and why and where, and any government agency that has a budget, they've got to present it to Congress every year, say we need this much money, Congress says we'll give you that much, now we're going to give you less, whatever. They control the money. James Madison described it as the power of the purse, because back then a purse was not just for women, men carried money in a purse too. Okay, now third thing, Congress approves treaties with other governments, okay, other countries. Fourth thing, Congress declares war. It's up to Congress to vote on whether or not the United States of America will go to war. Okay? They have the power to declare it or to decline to declare it. Okay? Congress raises and maintains the military. What that means is when we need a military, it's up to Congress to come up with the money to fund putting it together, raising it, okay, and then maintaining it for as long as we have it around, paying the paychecks, feeding the soldiers, supplying them, equipping them. Okay, you guys live in a United States that is radically different from the United States of 1787. What we're used to is a full-time military that's around every day of the year, every minute, ready to go. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. It wasn't like that back then in any country. Okay, let me give you an example, guys. In 1917, the United States voted, or Congress voted, that we would enter World War I. It had already been going for 3.5 years at that point. From the time Congress declared war to the time our soldiers actually started fighting in the war, it was almost exactly 1 year. You know why? Because we didn't have a military big enough, okay, to go and get involved in any particular kind of a war. Okay, it was the same thing with World War II. It took almost a year, for the most part, before we actually got into the fighting. Okay, all right, raises and maintains the military. Other side, collects the taxes, and then is in charge of that money that's collected. Regulates commerce, okay, meaning puts tariffs or taxes on imports and exports, determines how trade or commerce will move around the country or from our country into and out of other countries, regulates commerce. Last but not least, oversees the executive functions. In other words, Congress is a watchdog for the president. Okay? Remember, the president is our king or something like a king. What are we most scared of at this time in history? What are the American people, what are they most scared of? Kings, dictators, tyrants, one person with too damn much power, okay? When they're putting this thing together, they know that that executive branch is going to be one guy, okay? And they know that that one guy might get power hungry and kind of go out of control. That one guy has the potential to become a dictator, a tyrant, like George III. So it's up to Congress to watch the president, pay attention to the executive branch, and make sure that they don't step out of line over there. All right? Okay. Powers of the executive. Enforce the laws. Check. Power of the veto. Right? The president can veto bills that Congress passes off to him to become laws. He can say no and send it back. Negotiates treaties. Congress approves treaties, but only after the executive branch has negotiated them. The president is in charge of the embassies and the diplomatic corps and arranging our relationships with other countries. But even if the president and his people take 10 years to come up with some really complicated arrangement, Congress can always say no and knock it down. Checks and balances, right? That's how checks and balances work. The president can veto a law that Congress has come up with. Hello. Let me get my pen. Okay, the president can veto a law. Congress can decline to approve a treaty. Check back, right? The president requests war. Congress declares or doesn't declare war. If they don't, check back, fool, right? The power of the pardon. If you are accused of crimes, if you are in prison for a crime or more than one crime and have been there for 2 days or 39 years, the president has the power to get you off the hook. In a drawer in the White House, in the Oval Office, right there in the president's desk is a little get-out-of-jail-free card, like a Monopoly, okay? And the president can use those whenever and wherever he wants to. But a president has got to be very careful about who he gives pardons to, okay? Presidents usually don't pardon anybody until they're just about done being president, because then they got nothing to lose except how are the history books going to talk about me? What's my legacy going to be in terms of the way I'm perceived? Okay, but you definitely don't want to pardon somebody in a potentially very unpopular way. Okay, early on in your first term or your second term or your first term at all, because you want to win a second term. got to be careful about those pardons. Every president knows that. Okay, last but not least, federal appointments. That means federal jobs. There are positions of power within the federal government, and the president gives them to whoever he wants to. He puts this person in charge of, like, for example, the Treasury Department, the Secretary of the Treasury. That's the president's responsibility and privilege to determine who the Secretary of Treasury, of Defense, of Homeland Security, of Health, of Housing and Urban Development, of Education, of, let's see, what else do we have? The Department of the State, I already said state. State, Defense, Housing and Urban Development, Education, Commerce, Homeland Security, the Department of the Interior, created by Teddy Roosevelt, etc. How many jobs did George Washington, the first president, how many jobs did he have control of? Like 4 or 5, okay? How many jobs does President Obama have control over? Over 14,000 jobs, because the federal government is way bigger than they ever dreamed at that time that it could possibly become. Even the conservatives, even Hamilton, couldn't even possibly imagine the width and the breadth and the strength and the power of the federal government today. Okay, now last but not least, the Supreme Court. They've just got this one power. It's kind of a two-part power in combination, but that one thing is huge. Interpret laws. In other words, what does the language mean? What if a law was passed 50, 60, 90 years ago, but now it's essentially important to what's going on in the United States? Okay, well, we thought about things differently back then. So what is it that they meant when they wrote this? Interpret the laws and determine their constitutionality. Okay, is this law in keeping with the spirit of the Constitution of the United States? That is the big question. Now, hang on. Okay. What I want to do to illustrate the process of checks and balances is talk about how, hang on, a bill becomes a law or doesn't, and the process that can sort of be played out or whatever. Okay, so let's go back to the year 2005. George W. Bush is still in office, President of the United States, and let's just say that there's a real problem in the United States from a lot of people's point of view, and that's that too many Americans spit in public. Now that might seem kooky to you, a law against spitting in public, but once upon a time, guys, we basically needed that. Back in the 1830s and 40s, so many Americans chewed so much tobacco and spit, like just jets of tobacco juice everywhere. It's the grossest thing ever. Charles Dickens, the most popular English language novelist, maybe of all time, certainly of the 19th century, he came to visit the United States to do a lecture tour, and he kept a journal, which he published as a book when he returned to England, called American Notes. I highly recommend it. It's fascinating. In it, Dickens talked about what it was like to walk from one end of a railroad car to the other end. Okay? He talked about how when you walk down the car between the seats on either side, so many people were spitting tobacco this way and that way on the floor over there, trying to hit the spittoons, these brass buckets that were for spitting tobacco juice in. People would spit from like 2, 3, 4 feet away. Also, you're on a train, so the spittoons would just tip over and spill everything everywhere. He talked about how you were walking through a lake of tobacco spit, mucusy goo, and your trousers would be striped by shots of tobacco as you walk. Gross. Okay. Now, we outgrew it. Okay. We just got over it at some point, but let's say we never did. And in 2005, there's a national movement against this whole problem. And let's say at that point, hang on, my throat's getting dry, guys, that Congress decides they're going to pass a law against spitting in public. It's pretty simple, straightforward. If you spit in public, you're going to be fined this much money and blah, blah, blah. It's very, very basic law, not very long. And so what do? They take that law and they send it off to the executive branch to be signed. Okay? But George W. Bush, before he was president, He was the president of a baseball franchise, the Texas Rangers, and he was terrible at it, but that's another story. However, he's a big baseball fan. And if you guys know anything about baseball, you know the baseball players spit a lot, just between their teeth. Okay, they spit a lot of sunflower seed shells. If you look at a dugout in a baseball game, any Major League Baseball game, and all around over the stadium, there's peanut shells, sunflower seed shells. People chew the nuts, then they spit out the shells, right? Not a bunch of spit, but the shells. Well, that's spitting. Okay? So George W. Bush says, no! Dagnabbit anyway. I mean, a baseball player has to spit. And what about this? Suppose some young mother is burping her baby and that baby just burps up some spit onto the towel on her shoulder. Is she going to be fined $2,500? I mean, this law has not been well designed. All spitting in public cannot be illegal. I'm going to veto it. Bam, right? And then he sends it back to Congress. Okay? Now, what can Congress do at this point? Well, what they're almost certainly going to do is they're going to either the president has a press conference and describes what's wrong with the bill, if they find out that way, or some of them go to meet with the president, okay? And the president says, look, if y'all can just, straighten this thing out and add a few things in there and, leave baseball players out of it and then blah, 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 right? So they retool it, they send it back, the president says yay, and he signs it, and off it goes to become a law at some particular point. It's going to take effect, it's going to go into effect. It's not that day. It's in a week or a month or a year or even 10 years, but whatever. Okay. But let's say that Congress thought the bill was perfect. 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 Okay? And they said, we're not going to change a damn thing. President Bush has got rocks in his head. Even the conservatives in Congress are saying, he must be crazy. Now, is there any way for Congress to override a presidential veto? In other words, he checked them, right? Bang. Can they do anything about this? Yes, they can. If 2/3 of the members of Congress vote in favor of the bill, that's what we call a supermajority. Okay, 66%. Not just 51%. To get a bill out of Congress, you just have to get one person more than the other side, 51%. But now what you need is a supermajority, okay, to override the president's veto. If they get that, then that is exactly what happens. They check the president. They say, no way, dude. We don't care what you say. We are going to override your veto, and it is going to be a law whether you sign it or not. Okay? Now, the question is, can anything happen after this? Yeah. However, the law came into being with a veto or without a veto, everybody was happy with it, the president, but whatever, okay. Somebody in the United States, an individual, a group, the American Civil Liberties Union, could challenge this law. Or the Supreme Court could just look at it and decide to act before there's a challenge. But the bottom line is, the court, if they rule against the law, if they look at the law and determine that is unconstitutional, it's no damn good, that it doesn't agree with the spirit of the Constitution, then the court can say, we're checking all you fools. Bang. We're checking you and you. Now, is there a way to override the Supreme Court's decision? Can either branch check back? Well, yeah, actually. But the thing is, it's so hard to do that it's never even been attempted. Okay? So here's what can happen. Congress says, man, are you kidding me? The court's crazy. Boy, we got to do something about this. So they vote a supermajority. 66% of them say, we want this bill to become a law. Now what happens is every state, listen, every state legislature, not the national lawmakers, but the state lawmakers, you've got to get 66% of them, a supermajority of state legislators, to vote on that bill. If they do that as well, then it becomes a law regardless of what the court thinks about it. I said a minute ago, it's never been attempted. It's never happened. It's never been attempted. Okay? Because it's so hard, but also because of this. there's never been a time when the Supreme Court made a decision that angered more than, maybe 50 to 55, maybe 60% of the American people. Never 66 or 70 or 80% of the American people went, the Supreme Court's crazy. In other words, there was never a time where so many Americans disagreed with the court, so many congressmen, that they could have gotten that many votes and pushed the issue in that direction. It's just, like I said, it can be done. It's never been tried. Never happened. I would suggest to you, it never will happen. Okay? Now, I don't know if you guys grew up in the United States watching, Sunday morning cartoons. If you didn't, you don't know about this, but if you did, you will remember Schoolhouse Rock. All those groovy little cartoons teaching about math and grammar. Conjunction, junction, what's your function? I remember, guys, remember that one? And also teaching about U.S. history. The best of them, maybe, was the little cartoon, I'm Just a Bill, right? I was going to put a link in here, over to YouTube where you can see the video, but I decided not to, just because it's complicated and I didn't have time and the link might die and whatever. But anyway, I urge you, however old you are, if you've never seen this stuff, you got to check it out. And if you have, I urge you to go back and look at these things again, because it's a trip down memory lane that you'll really be sort of shocked by, especially if you're in your 30s or older because you haven't seen them for such a long time. Just take my word for it. It's something that will bring you a tremendous amount of joy. Okay? I mean, when you see this one, and he cuts in that great soul music voice, I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. Yeah. I know I'll be a law someday, at least I hope and pray that I will. But today I'm still just a bill. Check it out. You'll dig it. Okay, so we got these three branches of the federal government, all right? And we have discussed how checks and balances work, the different powers that can check each other, right? Or that can check the other branches and so on and so forth. So now, let's talk about something else that is essentially important for you guys to understand, and that is federalism. No, I got my slides out of order. I've got a definition here for you guys. Federalism, a system of government where sovereignty, or power, is constitutionally divided between a central governing authority, the national government for us, and constituent political units, okay, such as states or provinces, all right? So we've got two kinds of power in the country. We've got national power and we've got state power. England is not a federal system of government. It's a centralized government. There's just one government. I mean, there's town governments, but England's not divided up into provinces or states. France is. France is divided into departements, okay? Why did the Founding Fathers think a federal system of government would be better? Well, remember, they're scared of concentrations of power, and the president, so much power in one man, that's scary to them. So much power in one big government, that's scary to them, okay? So they like the idea of a national government and then states as well, to spread the power around, to divvy it up, to divide it, to, not have it all in just one place. It's all in one place in England. We had to fight a war against those fools, right? Because there was too much concentrated power, okay? Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely, right? Now, we decided to maintain a federal system of government with state divisions in the national government. But at the time we did this, we were the only federal system of government in the world. Today, France is a federal system. Let me think for a minute, guys. Nigeria is a federal system. South Africa is a federal system of government. Kenya is a federal system. India, federal system of government. Canada, jolly good to the north, right? Mexico is a federal system. So is Brazil. There are more than that. But okay, clearly federalism is kind of bitching. because we did it, and then a lot of other people did it. They saw our example, saw how in Mexico, see how successful Estados Unidos is, muy bueno, right? Hey, we're going to do it like they did it. We're going to be a federal system, right? Okay, now, let's consider for a moment how federalism works, okay? Here's a map of the United States, where I used a green pen instead of a blue pen on accident to portray the Great Lakes, okay? And what I've got here are 5 states, 5 kind of super big states. I wasn't going to draw some 48 ridiculous, states here. Let's just pretend that the country was made up of 5 great big states. California, Montana, Texas, New York, and Florida. Okay. 5 big pieces of real estate. Whereas today in reality we have 48 pieces of real estate. States, right? 48 states. And 2 somewhere else, Alaska and Hawaii. Let's just look at the continental map here. But there's 48 states and one other weird little piece of real estate over here. 5 states and 1 piece of weird real estate. Right over here, today it's on the border of Maryland and Virginia. Maybe you're going, I know what he's saying. The District of Columbia. The District of Columbia is a piece of American soil, right? It's about 10 miles across in any direction. It's not a state. It doesn't have senators. It doesn't have members of the House of Representatives, right? It's not a state. It's the piece of real estate where the nation's capital city is located. Washington, D.C. Washington, District of Columbia. Okay. That's a big star right there. All right, let's see if I can read over that. Yeah, whoa, look at me, man. I'm really living large here with my computer skills. There, oh, that looks actually kind of bitchin', huh? Okay, so here's the national government. Even in this imaginary 5-state setup, okay, there's D.C. right there. Okay, but in every state, there is also a capital, a state capital, right? In California, you've got Sacramento. In Texas, you've got Austin. In Florida, what do you have in Florida? Yeah, Tallahassee. That you have me there. In New York, you have Albany. And in Montana, Helena. Got it. And Helena. I mean, in Montana. In Montana, you've got Helena, right? Okay. Now, California makes its own laws. They make their own laws. Each state makes its own laws, right? The legislators, the state legislator or the state assembly in the state capital makes laws that only apply within the boundaries of the given state. So let's go back like 6 years or so. 5, 6 years. Well, even less than that, 4. Anyway, to the time when Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California. Governor Arnold, right? Yeah. And, Schwarzenegger, Mr. Universe and super body guy and all that kind of stuff, right? That's how he became famous. Big healthy eater and whatnot, even though he smoked cigars. But okay, let's say that Schwarzenegger got involved with this effort to get rid of red meat in California entirely because it's the leading cause of heart disease, which is the leading killer of all Americans. So, I was like, y'all know that we're not going to have any red meat anymore in California. No, none, period. No Dodger dogs, no fat burgers, no In-N-Out, no ribs, no ribeye steaks, nothing. Okay? No red meat. Now, when that law is passed in Sacramento, it is going to germinate. It's going to ripple out. It's going to go even bigger and farther, right? And it is going to cover California and everybody who lives in it. But it's not going to do anything. It's not going to cross the border in Montana. A law like that trying to cross the border into Texas, hell no, with a shotgun, right? And blow your brains out, try to take the red meat away from them. Away. Okay. Now in Texas, you may find it interesting to know, or you may not, I don't know, that it is lawful to have sex with animals. It used to be unlawful, but Governor George W. Bush was part of the process that repealed that law. Okay? It used to be illegal. Now it's not. In Texas, you can have sex with anything that you can basically arm wrestle to the ground, except for a person. I mean, you can have unnatural relations with any kind of animal you want to. But if you know, if you're male and you're gay and you want to have a certain kind of sex, no. Okay, don't ask me from Texas. It's like another planet, okay? You can be with chickens, cats, whatever. Okay, now, so they say, yay, for bestiality, right? Okay, and here it goes. Boom, boom, boom. Look at this, is kind of fun. Whoa. Okay, it radiates out through all of Texas. But is it going to cross over the border into California? Are you kidding me? With our little chihuahuas and their little pantsuits, and right, people in California, all warm and fuzzy, touchy-feely liberals. My little chihuahua, my Pookie or whatever, my hamster, I don't know what, but no, that's not going to go down in California. No way, no how. Okay, so there is state sovereignty. The states have power to make laws within their boundaries. Okay, but let's say that the American Civil Liberties Union decides to challenge that red meat law in California. They say, look, everybody needs to be careful and try not to die of a heart attack and whatever, but you cannot tell people that they can't eat red meat. This goes against the essential spirit of liberty and blah, blah, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, and they bring the case to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, okay, they make a decision. And the justices come down 5-4 or 6-3 or 7-2 or 8-1 or 9-0, whatever, against that law. They strike it down. When those justices strike down that law, that doesn't just mean it's all over for California's law. It means that nowhere in the United States can anybody ever get away with trying to pass a law similar to that, because they're establishing a precedent, okay? There's never going to be a law trying to take away the right of somebody to consume, sell, process, deal in red meat. It's never going to happen in New York, Florida, Texas, Montana, and certainly not in California, because the national government has spoken, right? The national government trumps the state government in most ways, most of the time. But federalism means that there's two kinds of power. There's state power, things that the states can do. There's federal or national power, things that the national or federal government can do. But then there's also areas where they overlap. Okay? So here is a chart that shows you. These are things that only the national government is allowed to do, like maintain a military, like declare war. Something that's not in here, print money or coin money, right? Only the national government can create money for us to use. Yeah, okay? States are in charge of establishing, local governments are in charge of all educational policy, okay? Blah, 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 marriage regulations, etc. Right nowadays, we got the big thing over gay marriage. Some states, yes, some no. Some people want a constitutional amendment defining marriage this way or not. You know what I'm talking about. But then there's areas where they overlap. They both collect taxes. They both establish courts. There are state courts and federal courts. They both regulate interstate commerce and banks. They both can borrow money. They both provide for the general welfare of the people, and they both punish criminals. You have federal prisons and state prisons. You with me, guys? We're almost done. About a minute. Maybe 2 or 3. Okay? Now, they were pretty thrilled after 3 months of hard work when they got the Constitution done. Now, what they've got to do is make many, many, many copies of it, distribute them to the states, and every state is going to have a convention, a constitutional convention, where delegates come from every county to vote on whether they will ratify, accept, or not ratify, deny this new national government. And remember, they made this great big thing. They were just supposed to fix the articles, make it a little bigger. Instead, they made this gigantic national power. So, in the slide share, I gave you guys a lot of information on the Federalist, or the Federalist Papers, and the essays that were written by Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay to argue people in the direction of ratifying the Constitution. But what this map does is it shows you where the Constitution was, ratified, where it wasn't, the counties, okay? So Federalist majorities, in other words, counties where they voted to ratify, blue, okay? If you'll notice, almost the entire coastal area, not just right at the beach, but even in for a ways, almost entirely blue. The big city areas, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, okay, Baltimore, blue. The Constitution is going to be good for trade. It's going to be good for banking. It's going to be good for businessmen. It's going to be good for industry. Those are the areas or industries, big banks, big businessmen, and the import-export trade operates out of. That's why those areas primarily were down with the Constitution. Anti-federalist, against ratification. Most of the interior regions, as you can see, small farmers, people living in small towns engaged in small town economic enterprises, didn't dig it. Some counties, each county had 2 delegates, and in some counties you had a tie. Okay? One liked it, one didn't, evenly divided. And then there was all this other American territory that was not yet politically organized, so there were no votes there at all. Okay? Now, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists argued back and forth in essays and in person or whatever over whether the Constitution was good or bad, and I talked about that in the slideshow. But this breaks down the Federalist position, the Anti-Federalist position, and then this tells how they actually got the job done. Okay, one of the things the Anti-Federalists were concerned with is that there was no Bill of Rights actually in the Constitution. So the Federalists promised that together they would all work after ratification to create what became the Bill of Rights. Okay? Ratification succeeded, and the new government was formed in 1789. It took about, 18 months for everybody to ratify. Some of the states ratified in like no time, 4 to 6 weeks, like Virginia. Some of them, it took about a year and a half. Rhode Island took 4 years. The reason being, the biggest reason, is that Rhode Island wanted a Bill of Rights, and then even after a Bill of Rights was put in, they were just not entirely sold on whether it was for real or not. Like, they just thought it was just there for show. And actually, it took a visit by Washington and Jefferson. They went together to Rhode Island and made about 6 speeches, okay? Jefferson specifically focusing on religious freedoms, the protection of that. Remember what Rhode Island was all about from day one with Roger Williams, religious freedom. They made speeches at a Catholic church, at Protestant churches, at a Jewish synagogue, because they really wanted to bring home, to Rhode Island, guys, you're going to dig this, it's great. And okay, James Madison ultimately will be in charge of drafting 10 amendments to the Constitution. He actually had 20. The committee that was in charge of taking his work and then sort of debating it, whatever, they shaved it down to a smaller number. What they did was, with a lot of the things that Madison had as separate amendments, they combined them, okay? And ultimately, this becomes a Bill of Rights, okay? So, 2 lectures, guys, about 40 minutes each. That's almost like one classroom session, but kind of long. But I hope you got something out of this. I enjoyed presenting it to you, and anyway, I'll see you guys next time. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill.